A thumbs up. Well, good evening, everybody. My name's Bob Sewell. I'm the president of the Houston Archaeological Society, and this is our January 2025 monthly members meeting. This evening, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Heather Parra, who several of you know, having worked with her with the Museum of Coastal Bend in Victoria and the Cobalt Project in Victoria. She now serves as museum creator in the Department of Anthropology at New Mexico State University. Her presentation this evening is entitled Solid as a Rock, Ritual Reuse of Hearthstones and Monuments in Early Medieval Wales. Now, early medieval Wales was a fragmented political landscape, and the threat of incomers from Ireland and Scotland led to an increased sense of urgency among the Welsh elite to retain their hold on the land. To that end, the ancient standing stone monuments were given secondary function as property boundary stones, lending legitimacy to land claims. Standing stones were also reused as sites for elite burial, suggesting connections to a mythic past. These elements of ritual reuse gave the elites deeper attachment to their lands, providing a perceived continuity built on assumed relationships with the past. Please welcome Dr. Heather Parra.
Oh,
Over
this
to you,
is me. All right.
You're on.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how I move the slides. There we go. Okay. This is my intro slide. Let me take this opportunity to warn you that this is going to be at times rather long-winded, and there is going to be a lot of weird terminology in here. So if it gets a little out of control, just bear with me. We'll come back around. All right. The primary means by which archaeologists make sense of past social behaviors is through analyzing physical evidence. As smaller acts of ritual or magic do not leave much in their wake, particularly in the highly acidic soils of Wales, it's challenging to understand the materiality of such practices. When looking at rituals of ancient people depositing remains or offerings at locations used by earlier ancient people and perhaps used again by later people, the record becomes even more convoluted. What I'm talking about here is ritual continuity, in this case happening in Wales and in relation to stones, both large and also sort of small. This idea has its root in the secondary uses of hearthstones as markers for land rights and burials, and is further evidenced in ritual reuse of standing stones to establish a greater connection to the past, real and mythic, to strengthen connections to the land for reasons of property rights and prestige. Holy cow, there we go. Okay, so here we've got two maps. And my purpose here is to show you where is Wales. On the left-hand map, you will see that Wales is in bright red. They're stuck onto the side of England. And then the big map on the right side is a detailed map of Wales, somewhat, with many of the early medieval groups or tribes or kingdoms identified. There will not be a quiz at the end. I do want to draw your attention to the boundary where Wales and England meet, where Offa's Dyke, which is a big earthworks, is located, and we are going to talk about that later on. So just the border between Wales and England. Okay. The hearth. The literal and figurative center of the early medieval Welsh home was its aelwyd, or hearth. In fact, the same term was also used metaphorically in reference to the general household. The household was not just a family unit, but a central social and economic entity, a kindred. The kindred was composed of 4 patrilinear generations with a male head of family. For a tribal people who moved around a good bit, the hearth provided a focal point through the use of a fireback stone, initially, of necessity, a very portable one, and a physical manifestation of their kindred-based social system. This stone was placed vertically at the back of the hearth. The hearth was located at the center of the home, both to spread warmth and to allow for many to gather around it. Each night when the hearth was swept out, the seed of fire, which was the last remaining ember, was kept alive, replaced in the hearth, and covered over with ash to wait for morning. When dawn arrived, the ember was uncovered and revived to burn anew. This ember, kept alive to be reborn each morning, is one of many rituals involving fire that is central to early Welsh culture. Fire and hearth rituals were closely related to rituals of death and burial. Cremation was a commonplace practice, with the body often burned on a pyre and the resulting ashes interred within a tomb or a cairn. The burial was often closed by placing the hearthstone as a grave marker or a memorial stone. Inhumations may have included the hearthstone as grave goods, or like in cremations, used as a marker to seal or close the burial. As Welsh tribes became less nomadic, the hearth was a common location for the placing of protective charms and talismans, and marking against evil in apotropaic efforts to keep the dwellers of the home safe from harm done by witches or magic. Among the various methods employed to ward off witches or prevent bewitchment of home and family were burying a witch bottle, prepared for that purpose, underneath the hearth, placing worn-out personal items like shoes in the dead spaces beside the chimneys, and placing burn marks on the mantel beam. The placement of these charms against evil in and around the hearth was deliberate, and perhaps was also a natural progression from the significance of the earlier carved hearthstones as they related to protecting the claims to property and family. The cauldron was located within the hearth at the center of the home and reflective of the importance of the aelwyd, or home fire. Cauldrons seeming to possess magical abilities feature prominently in Welsh mythology. Cauldron lore is widespread through Welsh and Irish mythology, and probably factored in Celtic mythology in general. This cauldron on the image here is the Gundestrup cauldron, which was discovered in Denmark, and it provides what's been called the Rosetta Stone of early religion. As it's got all the way around it on the inside and the outside, it's got depictions of ancient gods and other symbols. And this is suggestive that cauldron lore held a significant place in a broader spectrum of European beliefs. And cauldrons are probably the ancestors of the Grail lore of Arthurian legend. I do want to draw your attention here to the highlighted image in the insert here of the slide. This is depicting a story that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And so here we see somebody putting people into a cauldron and the people coming out as an army. And we're going to come back around to that in just a little bit. And again, this was a find in Denmark. In Welsh legend, the shape-shifting sorceress Ceridwen was believed to be the keeper of the cauldron, and her particular cauldron bestowed inspiration on Gwion Bach, the boy who became, through mishap and later rebirth via the cauldron, the legendary poet Taliesin. The earliest mention of Ceridwen and her cauldron is found in the Book of Taliesin, parts of which are believed to date to approximately the 9th century or possibly earlier. Elements of this lore continue in modern Welsh fiction, notably Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, wherein a sentient ember, or seed of fire, as we just discussed, known as Calcifer, resides in the hearth and powers the castle with his magic. And by contract, Calcifer possesses the wizard Howl's heart in exchange for eternal life as the flame in the castle's hearth. Therefore, Jones's work reflects the familiar idea of the hearth as the heart of the home. Some things never change. Okay, this slide shows a picture that I took at the National Library of Wales a number of years ago when they were doing an exhibit on Arthur in Welsh literature. And this is where we start to talk about the cauldron and the zombie army. that I made reference to in the Gunnestrup cauldron slide. Um, early medieval Welsh storytelling is really interesting. And the one in particular here, so the Irish and the Welsh were at war. And in the story, the Welsh were gathering up the Irish soldiers that they had killed and chucking them into the cauldron. And out of the cauldron came these zombie warriors that then fought for the side of Wales. This doesn't really have a whole lot to do with hearths, but it was just really cool and I wanted to put it in here. So there you go. Okay, back to the hearth. In early medieval Wales, the hearth was significant in matters of land and property rights. The right to use a hearthstone or to establish a hearth was tied to a family's claim to their land. The Welsh regarded themselves in terms of their occupation of a territory rather than as a localized tribe. Land was divided amongst kinship groups, and membership within that group determined the right to use land. The establishment of a permanent hearth in a given location was indicative of the right to occupy or work the land. When the tribes of Wales were still largely nomadic, a hearthstone would have been a portable symbol of home. As the Welsh people became more sedentary, their stones became larger and their hearths became more permanent. Upon the placement of a fireback stone, it was considered an offense to remove it. Even on the occasion that a house was destroyed, the stone remained in place as an indicator that an occupied homestead once stood there. The hearthstone not only became the symbol of inheritance and family ownership, the central fireplace with its hearthstone became a matter of fundamental importance within the Welsh tribal laws, such that property laws developed around it. The right of dadenhwdd referred to the right of a son to claim his deceased father or ancestor's land. On this occasion, he was said to have uncovered the hearth. The fireback stone was listed within the tribal codes, which were laws specific to a certain tribe, Venedosian, Domitian, Gwensian. And these were all kind of collected under the laws of Hilda, who was Howell the Great, and he brought together all of these laws and sort of codified them. Anyway, these laws reflected groups of people occupying various areas of Wales in this time period. Anyway, the hearthstone was identified in these codes as one of three indispensables to a common person. And this indispensable nature is due to it also being one of three testimonies of a man's right to inheritance of landed property. The Domitian Code determined that when the hobstone is to be seen of the father of the person who shall claim the land, or of his grandfather, or of his great-grandfather, or of others of his kindred, all these stand in the place of witnesses for him as to his right to the land. This suggests that the appearance of a hearthstone was sufficient evidence for a person to claim their ancestral property. Furthermore, the Domitian Code lists only three things that serve to preserve a memorial or bear witness as a person's right to land: the stone of an old kiln, a horse block or mounting stone, or a fireback stone. The significance of this hearthstone to a kindred as memorial or witness of homestead and land rights was because the stone held the mark of the kindred upon it. They were incising these stones with whatever their kindred's mark was. All right, we've made it through hearthstones, I think. Standing stones in the landscape. So developing or related to the practice of using the hearthstone to mark a grave or to lay claim to land is the similar use of monument stones. Inscribed stones were initially used as grave markers in the 5th through 7th centuries, but Irish settlers moving into southwestern Wales during the same period introduced the practice of using incised stones as boundary markers and as proof of land ownership. In Southwest Wales, there are two stones in particular that were likely used in this manner, and they are referred to as Penbryn 1 and Llanfernach 2. I don't have a picture of those guys, I'm sorry, but they look a lot like the stones in the picture, so use your imagination. They're both located on high ground, which is atypical of the regional landscape. And these stones, if they were used in marking boundaries and claiming land as they are thought to have, would have legitimized land rights and advertised the same to passers-by. Okay, This map here shows a sort of dissemination of inscription stones in Wales. And what's interesting is that it shows in red the inscription stones with which would have been a language used in Ireland, and ones without them. So there is some Irish influence shown here, but it's not overwhelmingly so. All right. So this period, 5th to 7th century, roughly, is characterized by a significant amount of incoming settlement from Ireland and Scotland in particular, and the Welsh Uchelwyr, which are nobles, were struggling to maintain possession of their land holdings. I guess westward expansion and colonization is a whole thing over there too. I guess technically that would be eastern and southern expansion. Anyway, this was the same period when Christianity was spreading very quickly in Wales, which also posed a threat to previously established land possessions. In probable response to these threats to their lands, a new use of newly erected stone monuments and reuse of those already in place came into play. And I think here on the map, what you're looking at is the juxtaposition of the newly erected, the ones with and the ones that were already there that did not have it. The Uchelwyr made use of sites which held obvious prehistoric features, such as cairns, barrows, or standing stones from the Bronze or Neolithic ages. These sites were frequently located with views of much of the surrounding landscape. In reusing these locations, the early medieval Uchelwyr, or nobles, were also using the continuity of past claims to the land to reinforce their own. To further underline their connection with the past, these stones were suggested to have been the graves of mythical heroes. The Uchelwyr then incorporated these heroes, mythical and historical, into their own ancestry, to add another layer of legitimacy to their control over land and resources. Here, the landscape made its way into the folklore and mythology to emphasize a people's sense of belonging to the land and their right to continue living on it. Hang on. You guys didn't know you were getting a literature lesson here. Okay, so this slide shows Pentre Ifan, which is a Neolithic dolmen, and I just wanted to give you an example of what this dolmen would have looked like, pretty much like every other dolmen. Here's why. The reuse of earlier monuments for new burials seems to have been a common practice in the early medieval period, not just in Wales, but throughout Britain and parts of Europe. Extant stones were used in the fabrication of the sides of kissed graves, and also used as grave markers above ground. The most well-known literary reference to this act is found in the Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf. As we all know, in the poem, Beowulf dies in a battle against a dragon, which took place at what appears to be a Neolithic chambered tomb. The tomb is described as having been built by ancient people, and within it was a dragon's hoard. Upon his death, Beowulf is cremated, and a mound is erected over the pyre in proximity to the Neolithic tomb. This description is reflective of ritual behavior in practice during the early medieval period, as evidenced by archaeological findings across Great Britain and Europe. Monument reuse is generally viewed as a source of power for rulers at the time, and a means by which to connect their present with a mythic past. The Anglo-Saxon practice of burying their own dead in or near ancient monuments could also indicate their intentions to construct social identities out of mythical and historical origins. Rather than a place maintaining ritual significance over time, a group with elite social status employed association with the past as a means by which to legitimize their status. Sutton Hoo, with its various phases of settlement there, from Bronze Age to the Anglo-Saxon era, illustrates his point. Other examples of ritual continuity include Iron Age hill forts placed in the same location as Neolithic causewayed chamber enclosures, Romano-Celtic temples found inside empty hill forts, and Roman buildings reused as Anglo-Saxon churches. However, not all societies make a clear distinction between ritual and ordinary, and amongst those that do, there are often status requirements for the use of these places of ritual significance. Reuse of ancient monuments for elite burial purposes may have been as significant as were the artifacts placed in the burial alongside the dead. This continuity of use of monuments within the landscape not only links later burials with the ancient past, but also ties the landscape to the perceived identities of those reusing the monuments. Deliberate selection of an existing monument site to bury the elite dead suggests that the people of the region continued to view their specific landscape as having significance within their ritual lives. Okay, here we have the Pillar of Eliseg. The inset here is a map. There's a little cross showing where it is. It's right there on the border between the Welsh region of Powys and Mercia in England. The Pillar of Eliseg is one of only 3 sculptured cross stones in Wales that can be dated with any certainty. Most of these, what are called Group 3 type stones in Wales, are associated with specific regional or even more localized groups. The pillar is an assemblage of elements from multiple cultures and eras. The column is currently about 2.4 meters high, standing on a square base, which is on top of an oval burial mound with a stone curb. The mound is likely at some point to have contained the burial of a significant Bronze Age leader, but those remains are now lost to the acidic Welsh soils. A later interment in a box of blue stones was added during the early medieval period. The column itself may have originally held a crosshead at the top. It draws heavily from Mercian cross-shaft design, and like those monuments, it may be deliberately paying homage to Roman traditions in both form and function, as it was intended to convey the secular power of Cyngen, king of Powys, who died in 856, over the area, as well as his ecclesiastical patronage. The inscription on the pillar identifies it as having been commissioned by Cyngen. The inscription also describes a genealogy of the kings of Powys to include linking them to Vortigern of 5th century Britain and Magnus Maximus, 4th century usurper to the Roman Empire. Vortigern was he was actually the first guy who worked with Merlin before Arthur entered the picture. And he was the sort of king of Britain when the Saxons arrived in the 5th century, and he sold out his neighbors, the Scots and the Picts, and handed over a bunch of their lands to the incoming Saxons. So he was kind of a bad dude. I mean, powerful, but not a great guy. Anyway, the pillar connects these mythical associations with Cyngen's more immediate ancestry, detailing the triumph of Eliseg, Cyngen's grandfather, over the English. Here we go. There we are. This is Offa's Dyke. This is the boundary between, like along the boundary of Wales and England. It's a great big earthworks. Offa's Dyke is a geographical boundary separating Wales from England, likely to have been constructed to deter Welsh invasions of Mercia in the 8th century. This recognized border added a physical element in establishing a national identity. Not only was the eastern border of Wales historically a fluctuating one, dependent on politics, but also early medieval Welsh and English concepts of where that border was may have differed quite a bit. Offa's Dyke was likely constructed as a defensive wall by Mercia to fend off aggressions from Eliseg and Powys during the late 8th century. And therefore, the Pillar of Eliseg may be the only record of Powys's expansion under Eliseg at the expense of Mercia. As a physical barrier, its visual impact and therefore its power as a symbol of divisiveness between 2 distinct peoples remained impressive even as the years passed and the walls softened. All right, here's where I need you guys to bear with me because suddenly we're talking about books. I promise we're going to get back to the rocks. As the transition from oral to written language developed in Wales, we begin to see land disputes or inheritances noted in the pages of important books. The recording of land possession or transfer in writing, especially within the confines of a book perceived to be of lasting value and significance, was reflective of the great importance of land to the Welsh people. So far, there's been no general study of the use of sacred books in this manner, but there are examples of the use of religious books as record repositories elsewhere in the world. It was not unheard of for churches to offer their books for the recording of grants and other land transactions to parishioners, patrons, and people with no association to the church, although some association would probably have been a more welcoming offer. The recording of title to land may appear to be the most obvious use of this manner of record keeping, but it's probably not the most common. The Lichfield Gospels, and that's what you're looking at here, is also known as the Book of St. Tylo or the Book of St. Chad. I actually named my recently deceased dog after this portion of my research. This particular book is a now incomplete manuscript of the Gospels, which has been kept at Lichfield Cathedral for about 1,000 years. The exact date of its arrival at the cathedral remains unknown, but the marginalia on page 4 of the book serves as a record of Godwine, son of Earwig, being cleared at Lichfield of a charge of unlawful marriage placed upon him by the bishop Leifgar. Leifgar was bishop from 1020 to 1027, so the book was there by the end of the first quarter of the 11th century. The book has become known as the Gospel of St. Chad in homage to the patron saint of the cathedral. The marginalia in the Gospels includes Chad II, also known as the Surrexit Memorandum, which is the oldest surviving example of written Welsh in a book, although it also contains a little bit of Latin. All earlier surviving examples of written Welsh are found on stone monuments. Evidence from early Welsh inscriptions indicate that Welsh scribes were making use of exotic alphabets to include runes. Furthermore, the peculiarities of spelling found in the marginalia are also found on stone monuments of the same period in South Wales. This Surrexit Memorandum, believed to have been written in the early 9th century, is one of 2 items of marginalia located on page 141 of the Gospels, which is also the final page of the Gospel of St. Matthew. It is the oldest known surviving land record in a sacred manuscript, period. The content of the memorandum is a legal document regarding a property dispute, the oldest known example of Welsh law in action. This is of particular interest as it appears to provide some evidence of continuity of legal system from the 9th century to the 13th, when the laws were recorded in law books. The memorandum records the settlement of a dispute over a property called Tur Telych between Tudfulch, the son of Choed, and son-in-law of Tudri, and Elgu, the son of Geli, and the kindred of Idvared. According to the memorandum, after long debate, Elgu, who was in possession of the property at the time, was found to be the rightful owner, but in good faith, he gave his opponent a horse, 3 cows, and 3 newly calved cows in the interest of retaining peace between them. In exchange, Tudfulch and his people vow never to lay claim to the title of the land. No judge is mentioned in the memorandum, though a list of witnesses followed the judgment. While identifying the location of the property in question in Chad 2 has proved impossible with any certitude, this memoranda provides further support to the evidence found in 4 other marginalia entries in the Lichfield Gospel, all of which indicate that by mid-9th century there were well-established land rights in place. The other marginalia are suggestive that the book was at Llandilo, which is a little church in Wales that's actually associated with an even earlier holy well, by the early 9th century. These marginalia contain a reference to the episcopate of Nobis, which can be confirmed in the list of bishops at Llandaff as having happened before 840. In other entries, he's listed as a witness but not a bishop. Nobis's inclusion therefore moves the possession of the book by Llandilo to sometime before 840. Whether this book was amongst booty from raids into Mercia remains uncertain, though it is known that there were Welsh raids late in the 8th century, namely by our friend Eliseg, leading to the perceived necessity of Offa's Dyke as a defensive measure. So, the Mercian belief in a need for the dike seems conclusive enough that the Welsh were indeed posing a threat during this period, though the acquisition of the book in this manner cannot be proven. Regardless of its origins, the book was considered a highly important church possession to be venerated, and given its status as a sacred object, would be a likely item on which to take oaths or record evidence of solemn acts or deeds having been done. While we can't know how much marginalia was lost with the missing portions of the Gospels, it seems notable that of the 8 surviving examples of marginalia, 5 of them are recording land transactions. All right, new slide. Okay. Chads 3 and 4 on pages 18 and 19 of the Litchfield Gospel are both memoranda regarding the gifts of land and date to the late 9th century, as we discussed. They're both in Latin with some Welsh inclusions, and the list of witnesses for both are almost identical. Chad 3 specifies the land it concerns as being named Trefwyddog, which was granted to Llandailo by Rhys and the kindred of Greddi. Details of the render of this property follow and include mention of a ram in summer and 40 loaves in both summer and winter, plus a sow and 40 manuclen, the meaning of which is not clear. Chad 4 does not identify the land it concerns, or possibly the name was cut off during the binding process. The boundaries are provided in Welsh, and later scholars have suggested that the land is located in Llanecrys, at the northwestern corner of the Commot of Caio, where it borders with the Commot of Mabwinion in Ceredigion. Part of this estate later becomes Llanecrys, or Lanecross, grange of the Premonstratensian Abbey of Tally, founded by the Lord Rhys. This is a lot of words. Everybody okay? The boundaries of Trefwyddog on the northwest side were marked by 2 standing stones called Hirven Gwyddog and Birven Gwyddog. And you can see on the map in the slide, Hirven Gwyddog is at the upper left-ish quadrant of the image. Down at the very bottom of the map, you see Tally Llachau, and that is the Tally Abbey, the Premonstratensian Abbey that I just mentioned. Where were we? Oh, okay. The boundaries of Trefwyddog were on the north side, were marked by 2 standing stones, Hirven Gwyddog, noted on the slide, and Birven Gwyddog. Chad 4 also mentions a specific boundary stone, Hirven Gwyddog, or the long stone of Gwyddog, which is a large prehistoric standing stone of about 15 feet in height that remains in place on the northern boundary of Llanecrys, also the northern boundary of Candref Mar and currently of Carmarthenshire. This same stone appears in a charter and confirmation of approximately the year 1244, mentioned in an inspectments dated 1324, presumably of the original charter, and confirming a grant of the grange of Llanecrys to Tally Abbey. The grange boundaries align closely with those of the parish of the same name, which for a number of miles also follows the county line dividing Carmarthenshire and Cardiganshire. Hirven Gwyddog is along this line, looming over the Teivi Valley. A post-dissolution manorial presentment dated 1633 establishing grange boundaries for Tally Abbey includes details for the grange of Llanecrys, the boundary of which follows a brook called Gordogwy to a location called Ilanlas, and from Lanlas unto a stone called Hirven Gwyddog, and from thence unto another stone called Birven. Local folklore, collected in the late 19th century, claimed that the 2 standing stones commemorated an ancient battle that took place on that site, though there is no evidence to support this. However, there are a number of indications that suggest the area to have been a place of importance. The Roman road is nearby. Manorial organization points to it having been a significant early Welsh settlement as well. The Canu Devi, a 12th century writing, describes the bounds of the Noddfa, or sanctuary of Llandovery, and in doing so mentions a stone which is likely Hirven Gwyddog. And that reads in English, from Caron with its fair rule, with its purple hue, from Llyndu, broader was the roused tumult as far as Twrch, where the land is bounded by a stone. Whilst the appearance of a boundary stone, cairn, burial mound, or standing stone in the early charters was relatively commonplace as a means of detailing the boundaries of a property, in most cases, the ancient landmarks have vanished. This very ancient conspicuous standing stone, or Vempwithog, has considerable documentary evidence spanning roughly 13 centuries. Welsh standing stones are looming features in the landscape, obvious candidates for ritual reuse. In many cases, they also served as interment locations, establishing a mythic past to reinforce land claims and status. Honestly, I ran out of time for writing a riveting conclusion, but I have for you a gratuitous image of a very cool inscribed stone from the 6th century. This is a 6th century memorial stone in Ceredigion, which is Cardiganshire. The Latin inscribed stone says, "Here lies Corbelengi the Ordovician." And those are the people that did absolute battle with the Romans in North Wales. When this was excavated, they did find an urn of ashes and Roman coins. So here endeth my very, very wordy lesson. I'm happy to take any possible questions about all of that chaos.
Everybody can unmute themselves if you'd like.
Yeah.
Is everybody totally lost?
I am amazed by your command of the Welsh language.
Oh
I was
God, I'm a
about to
butcher.
comment on that also.
It's
Thank you very
terrible.
much.
Maybe Jeff Mills isn't, but you know, he can translate, he can explain what you said after.
I was once told that my Welsh is so bad, I'm actually speaking Cornish.
They're pretty much of a muchness, really, where I come from.
So how does the Mabinogion fit in with this time-wise? Were they written a lot earlier?
The original stories in the Mabinogion, that was compiled in like what, the 13th century.
Oh, okay.
But they were written much, much earlier, and a lot of those stories date to before the 9th century. So they are of the time.
Okay, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, when I grew up in Wales, the teachers taught us in Welsh and they used to read stories from the Mabinogion to us.
Great stories to be told. That's the history of Wales in there.
Yeah.
So how long were you actually in Wales doing this, I guess, research for this sort of presentation?
Well, actually, most of this research for this presentation was done while I was doing my PhD there.
Okay. All right.
So off and on, I guess, just shy of a decade.
Oh, wow. A long time. Oh,
Clear
has
as mud,
anybody?
right?
Yeah, well, we need time to digest it all. You know, we've
I
got
know.
it,
It's
we've
a
got it
lot.
recorded. We'll look at it again, and it was very interesting. I thought it was. So, has anybody else got any questions? There's questions.
Well, if not, let me give you a little bit of a background as to why I'm working on this.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
I was asked to participate in a session for the SAAs this year, and it's on ritual closure. And I don't have a whole lot on ritual closure other than the first few paragraphs that I talked about, the use of hearthstones as grave markers. And the sort of seat of fire thing when you sweep the fire out and you save a little bit. But what I do have is the opposite. I have the antithesis of it, which is, ritual continuity. And I was like, well, my entire PhD had a lot to do with ritual continuity. So I can possibly add a little bit about, stones, which were kind of the focus of ritual continuity in early medieval Wales. So, unfortunately, I have so much information about this and I've spent so many years studying this, I have to kind of dial it in. So this was my first attempt at condensing this to a palatable size for an SAA session. And so you guys are my guinea pigs.
I thought you
Okay,
did a
so-
great job.
Yeah, so I have a question. The concept of ownership regarding these stones, okay, and them indicating ownership, was it directed purely at other Welsh clans, if you like, or was it really towards English and other Danish or whatever, Scottish, Irish, anybody else, basically? Was it, internal or more external?
Well, starting out in early medieval Wales, if we're looking at, say, 5th to 7th centuries, it was more as not so much an ownership of the stones, but an occupation of the area that the stones
Right,
sort
the
of
land.
look over. So like this stone on the slide here is on this rise and it looks out over the landscape. And so these are kind of, like boundary markers. And so if you, bury your dead relative at the foot of some Neolithic honkin' big stone, when the Irish arrive or when the Scottish arrive, you can be like, you know what? You can't have this land because it's my land. It's been my land since time immemorial.
Right.
And I can prove that to you because my dead relatives are buried at the foot of this clearly very ancient monument. So there is a mythic past connection there. So this was just reinforcing, in most cases, the early medieval elite, the Chauer. It was reinforcing their claim on land as they were being slowly condensed and pushed out by these incomers, the Irish and the Scottish coming in.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
were any of these hearthstones used in any burial chambers later, or reused for burial chambers? Or was that as contemporaneous?
So, sorry, you're asking if the Hearthstones were reused in the
Yeah,
burial chambers
yeah,
or after?
in the burial chambers.
Yeah, actually, and that's the only case where I have a sort of solid example of ritual closure was when these stones were used to sort of yet again mark a burial. So, you have a burial chamber and then you take a clan hearthstone, which has the mark of the kindred. So like,
Right.
the Mills family hearthstone, and
Yeah.
you take it into your burial chamber and you put it down there. Like, yet not only is this chamber here, but also this has relationship to my kindred.
Okay. Sounds right. Yeah.
I noticed that at least on one of your slides that the monument was on an earthen mound. It looked like it was on an earthen mound. Was that just one example of that, or is that a common thing?
It's really common. The thing with these big standing stones is that they turn up in places on the landscape where there's an unnatural rise and there's, visibility for, a fairly good amount of space. So, and you see the same thing with hill forts, hill forts, like, you're in Wales and there's just a hill fort, hill fort, hill fort, hill fort. And like everywhere you go, there's at least one on the horizon. And I think the idea here was that you can see these standing stones on these mounds, on these rises from a long way away. So it's, easily advertising to people passing through that like, hey, somebody has possession here.
Were these stones ever used as navigational devices, or were they purely to say, hey, this is my property?
I have read, and this may be more of a Roman era thing, but I have read where stones were placed along the Roman roads, similar to this purpose, where they would place the stones along the road, like the standing stones. So it would indicate, like, if you turn at this stone, you will get to the place where so and so has property
Right.
or so and
Right.
so lives. So to an extent, perhaps, I've only read the one thing on it, the one journal article on it, and I don't know that anybody else has found any means by which to solidify that argument, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
Maybe they were just property claims more than
Maybe.
anything. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
I may have missed it at the beginning. How far back do the standing stones go in Wales in particular? Like
Neolithic.
Iron Age, Neolithic? Okay.
Neolithic. So
Now, we all know about Stonehenge. We've heard about rune stones from up in the Viking Danish area and all that. Anywhere else in the world that they did standing stones? I mean, I really don't think you hear about it much in the Americas. What about Asia? Any place else? Africa? Have they done any kind of standing stones are you aware of?
I don't know about Africa. I believe that there was some form of this in, the stands, the sort of Near East-ish area.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
And possibly, and I could be absolutely lying about this, I feel like there's some sort of similar mechanism in the Australia part of the world.
Hmm.
Again, Neolithic area. I mean, time frame.
Man, I don't know.
Okay.
I think there are a
Absolutely
lot
outside
of
my
standing
area.
stones in Spain. Well, there's a lot of standing stones in France
France and
of that
Northern
period.
Europe.
I think
Yeah.
it's a pretty Western European deal.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, if there's no more questions, Heather, thank you very much. I found this talk very interesting.
Thank you.
So sort of a little different from what we normally have, but it was fantastic.
I know, I should have warned you ahead, but
No, I thought it was good. We like the variety. So thank you very much. And to everyone, thank you for participating and some good questions. I'd like to wish everyone a very pleasant evening.
Diolch yn fawr, Heather.
And Heather, if you hadn't read the remarks, you got very much a big thank you from Gail, Jimmy, and Adriana. Gail
don't
said
know how to
hello and
see
thank you
those.
very much.
So
thanks, guys.
All right,
good
take
evening,
care.
everybody. Bye bye.
We'll talk to you soon,
Bye,
okay?
Heather.
Bye.